Hello ladies, gentlemen. Alright, today I'm going to talk about bullet substitution. And what I mean by bullet substitution is you have load data for a particular bullet, but you don't necessarily have that bullet, but you have one of the same weight. And that's kind of common practice among loaders, is to substitute bullets for the same data. I do it. A lot of people do it, but there is some danger when it comes to that, especially if you're at the top of that load. So it's always good practice to actually start at the bottom. You know, work your way back up, go back to that starting load, and work your way up. So I'm going to kind of cover some bullets here, and we're going to talk about that and tell you my theory behind it and why I think it's safest to actually start from the starting load or starting grains and work your way up to the max when changing, when substituting bullets, or just when you have a new bullet. So a lot of people do it, and I think the biggest reason they do it is supply. You know, what supply you have in your local area. And you know, nobody wants to purchase, you know, a dozen different loading manuals. You know, we want some decent ones, but you know, I mean, who can afford all that? I'm sure some people can, but you know, I don't want to dig through 24 manuals to find, you know, cross-reference and find the load I'm looking for. So it's done. I do it. But when it comes to loading, we're talking internal ballistics here, and I'm not a professional. I'm not a scientist. You know, I'm not a, you know, I don't do this for a living. It's a hobby. But subtle changes do make a difference. And even when you're looking at, a lot of people call them recipes, but when you're looking at data, a lot of that data will say this case, this bullet, this primer, and this overall length. And the reason why they do that is you can have a variance from case to case as far as capacity. You know, how much internal capacity that case has. So that can actually affect pressures when you're getting high up on that end of the charge, and can be, you know, catastrophic in some ways. So if we look right here, we've got 3 bullets here, and they're from 3 different manufacturers. We have a copper coated or plated lead bullet from X-treme. We have a hollow point from Hornady and another hollow point from Nosler. All 3 of these have the same weight. And then we carry over here, we have another 9mm. We have a hollow point from Hornady, and then we have a copper plated from X-treme. It's a round nose. And then carry over to this, we have a 45. Both of these are 200 grain semi-watt cutters. But you notice there's a drastic difference in how they're designed. And then over here we have some 38s. We have a 147 grain watt cutter, and we have a 158 grain, and both of these are plated from X-treme. 158 grain, their hollow point version, which is still a plated bullet. So if we look at the design of these, let me see if I can mount these up so you can kind of see the difference. Since I have 3 for the 9mm, you can see a drastic difference in how those are designed. How long the bullet is, how much bearing surface you have, and also how the ogive would be, you know, as far as bullet jump. So if we're talking about bullet jump, and we're comparing these two bullets right here, same weight, they're both hollow points, they're both metal or copper jacket, but you notice one may have a slightly more bearing surface, or it may be actually the same. But when that bullet jumps and contacts that rifling, you're going to have more space, I believe, with this Hornady, because it's kind of a cone shape versus this round nose. So to me, I'm thinking we're going to have more pressure spike depending on what the overall length is if you set them at the same. So that's why it's important we go by overall length based on bullet design. So you can increase pressures even though these are the same weight bullet. You could actually have this one a little bit, you know, overall length a little bit longer than this one. You know, that way we're not touching that rifling. And we have that safe bullet jump to reduce those pressures. So the more bullet jump you have, the less pressure it's going to build faster. Of course, pressure is important when it comes to, you know, sending that bullet down the down the barrel. So it's important that we look at stuff like that when we're trying to substitute bullets and start from the starting load. You know, cases are the same way. Last video I showed some cases of that Max Tech that, you know, just really had a lot of material in that case, and it was a heavy buildup. I think I've still got one. Yeah. So here's that case that I showed from that last video. It'd probably be good to watch it. So you can see all that material. So you're going to have less space in that case for that powder. So you're going to build up pressures a whole lot faster versus a standard case without that buildup. That's why I'm not going to load this. And that's why it's important that you compare that and always start at the starting load. So if we look at these two are both 45. Okay, they're both the same weight. They do have a similar design, but they are different. So I believe there's more bearing surface to this because there's no cutout in it than this, and this has got it's been lubed, so it's got a wax on it. But the hardness of these could be totally different, and the diameter is going to be a little bit different too. So you're going to have a bigger diameter on this one versus this one. Even though this one has more bearing surface, we're probably going to build up more pressures with this cast bullet just because the hardness or the brittle hardness of that metal, that lead. So when pressures start to spike and it's building up behind it, you know, it can deform that metal. So you're talking a lot of science here that I don't even understand that's going to expand that bullet and create a, you know, kind of stop up that rifling so we can have pressure to send it down the barrel. So I definitely, if I'm on a, you know, the max load on this and say I want to load, you know, these next, I'm going to start over my charge. I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to work my way up, and I'm going to look for those signs of pressure. Because you can't just substitute bullets and use the same data. And same goes for the 38. You know, we have like 11 grains difference on these. And the bearing surface is similar when they're shot out, but the bullet jump is it may vary. So that 11 grains of more weight could make a difference, even though you have the same bearing surface. So a lot goes into it. You shouldn't just jump on it and say, hey, I've got this bullet, it's the same weight. Now, I think where a lot of people get confused is they look at the copper-plated ones. And a lot of the recommendations from the manufacturers that make copper-plated bullets, they say use data for full metal jackets. But they're not talking hollow points here. They're talking full metal jackets because it's similar in design. So that way you have that same spacing, that same overall length. But you still need to start from the starting load. And everyone knows you can't push these down the barrel as fast as you can a full metal jacket because you're going to get some leading. And the whole point in reloading, well, there's several points, but the objective when you pull the trigger and you send that bullet down the barrel is you want a stabilized bullet. So you want that bullet to be stabilized so it's spinning and it hits target. That's the whole point in loading. That's the whole point in the shooting sports, is we hit the target we intend to hit. Now, the fastest, hottest charge doesn't always do that. So that's why it's kind of funny, you know, I had that quest for speed too, and sometimes I still do, you know, I want the fastest bullet I get. But that's always, or it's not always going to be the most stable bullet, you know, especially when you get into rifles. You know, a lot of people will, you know, hit that compressed load, depends on the powder, you know, how it burns, so powder's going to make a difference. But a stabilized bullet is what you're looking for, so it hits target. So a big difference. I'm glad I had 3 different types of bullets here. So we have a Nosler, Hornady, and then Extreme. So look at that. Next time you go to, you know, grab a data book and say, hey, I'm going to load this and I'm going to do that, you know, pay attention to that because it varies greatly depending on the bullet. And I think a lot of people reference the Lyman book when it comes to bullet substitution, and the Lee book. And I was going to see if I could just find a quick page so we can kind of look at overall length. let's see, 9mm probably be the best page. So we have a, let's see, there's 215 grain, that's a 124, and then they have 120 grain lead. So we'll look at the 115 grain. So we have two options. We have the Barnes and then this one, which is actually the Hornady XTP 115 grain. So if we look at the overall length, we're looking at, for the jacketed hollow point, the Hornady, it says 1.090. But if we look at the Barnes, the TAC XP, it says 1.10. So there's a difference in that overall length. So if we didn't have both of these, and say we were wanting to load, we were wanting to load the Hornady, and we went with this overall length, it could cause us some problems. And vice versa too. If we have this overall length, especially on this max grain, a little bit shorter, that 1.0, I know it's, a thousandths, but still, if you're looking at that 1.0, depending on the charge of it, you could create higher pressures by that bullet being seated down lower. So it's important. So, pay attention to that. So those are similar bullets, or they are by weight, but if you look at the charge, see we have a type group here. For this one, type group starting grain is 4 for the Hornady, and max is 4.5. And then if you look at the Barnes 115 grain, starting grains is 3.9, the max is 4.3. Now you may not think a tenth of a grain is a lot, but it definitely produces higher pressures. A tenth of a grain in powder in a confined space is going to totally change everything. It's going to change the pressure. So if you're doing from a meter, if you're metering, your powder, I would strongly suggest you don't meter at the max grains. And the reason why, you could get a tenth over, and that tenth could be, cause your gun to, break or explode. You possibly injure your hand, or, somebody next to you, or whatever. It could be bad. Now, I've went over max loads on some stuff, but I was very cautious, and I really don't do it now. I really did that stuff when I first started loading, because I was all into the most power. I want this thing to go. So now I've kind of luckily learned my lesson without the consequences. So be careful with bullet substitution. All bullets are not created equal. Their design is different. If we look at the 147 grain, we look at the x-treme. It's your basic round nose, and we look at the Hornady. It's kind of got a boat tail. I love these bullets just because of that fact. So you're going to have a little bit more case capacity here than you will here. So you'll have a little bit more head space just because of the design of the bullet. And when you're talking powder and explosions and stuff like that, ignition, all that, those tiny fractions make a huge difference. So that's why it's the golden rule: go by published data, not by what your buddy says. If he's got a little cheat sheet dropped in a bag or wrote on a bag, it's going to vary depending on firearm to firearm. If I'm loading 357 mag, or let's say 44 mag, and I'm loading it for a pistol, a revolver, I'm probably going to use H110 on that. That's kind of like my go-to powder. I don't have a 44 anymore, but I'm going to use H110 on that. Now, if I use that same round and I'm going to load on a lever action 44 rifle, I'm more prone to go, excuse me, to IMR 4227. I use that for, that round for a rifle. That's what I'm going to go with, because you have that on the revolver. You have that space, that tiny space between the wheel and the barrel. You're going to lose some of that pressure. The H110s, it's pretty hot powder. They're close in burn rate, H110 and 4227, but it may just be me, but I feel a whole lot safer using 4227 in a rifle versus H110. That's just me. So those lever actions, I prefer the 4227. So it's going to vary from firearm to firearm. So if you're shooting, whether it's a Smith & Wesson automatic, you're shooting revolvers, Glocks, whatever the case may be, and you're going from a 4-inch barrel and moving up to a 5 or a 6, and you've tested your data and worked up to that max charge on that 4-inch barrel, don't take that ammo and put it in that 5-inch barrel, because it may not perform like it should. You know, you actually need to start over unless you're, you know, in the middle. If you're in the middle of the starting and the top, you know, top of the grains, you're safe to interchange. I would believe. Now, I'm not a professional, so I'm just giving you my opinion when it comes to this. So I tend to, you know, kind of lean on the cautious side. In the past, I didn't. You know, I wanted that fastest bullet. So just remember, when you're substituting bullets, start from the starting loads, because the design of these bullets is going to affect the internal ballistics. It's going to make a difference. So this is kind of shooting from the hip again. If you have any comments, you want to add something to it that I left out, don't be rude to any other commenters. You know, this is a hobby I think we're all enjoying, and just some of us are just getting started, and there's a lot of folks out there that's watching these videos that's probably been loading twice as long as me. So enjoy yourself, be safe about it, keep good records, write stuff down, and inspect your brass. Make sure you're using those components and start from the starting point. Don't jump in the middle and jump up to that highest load. I know a lot of people, we want it right now, and we just want to load up, you know, 200 or 300 rounds, and we want to go shoot, but we can't do that. We have to start from that beginning, you know, do about 5 at this grain and about 5 more. You can do 6, 10, however you want to do it. You could, depending on the pistol you're shooting, you know, you can do, if it's a wheel gun, I normally do 5 or 6, whatever the gun will hold. And then I do my next 1/10 of a grain, or 2/10 or 3/10. But don't make it so you're hitting that top, that max charge in the beginning. You want to work up to that, because you may find when you get like 2/10 below that, you're already seeing signs of pressure, and you don't need to fire those last 5 or 6. So we're going to call this one a wrap. I hope it was beneficial. Read the data. Be very careful when it comes to listening to others for data, especially when it comes to bullet substitution. I work mine up, you know, on these. And it's probably a good thing if use data from the next heaviest bullet when it comes to using copper plated. So if you got 115 and it says use full metal jacket, either go by the starting grains or go over to 124 full metal jacket, because their starting grains are going to be less 99% of the time, because you're taking, you know, you've got less space in there. So that's going to move you down to that safer charge. But also you got to look at not enough charge on certain powders can be detrimental too. So it's a touchy subject, and it can be a little bit dangerous. So your best bet is go by published data. If you don't have data for, you know, say this Nosler 115 grain, don't load it. Don't load it. But if you've got data for the Hornady, buy the Hornady, or buy the Hornady book, or buy the Nosler book. You know, go ahead and get the book. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Give me a like. Leave some comments. I know I've forgotten something. This was kind of spur of the moment, and I just pulled out some bullets. And let's get a conversation started. Y'all have a great day.